Okay, thank you so much, Susan, Jen, Amber, for being here. We're excited to have you at the 7th Annual Step Up Conference that is going to be virtual on April 28th. And so you all are going to be presenting about art. So tell me about your session. What's the name of your session?
I can take this one if y'all are okay with it. So our session is called Why Art is the Key Ingredient to Raise Anti-Racist Kids. So we are a group, we're actually 4 facilitators. 3 of us will be presenting at the conference, and that's the 3 of us that are here. But we are all moms first and foremost, I think. And then we also work with kids and families in a variety of different ways, which I'll let Jen and Amber kind of talk about that for themselves. I personally train teachers, and I'm a mom at home, right? And I unschool my own kids at home. So we do a lot of art-based activities as ways to sort of enter into really complex topics for kids that maybe a common narrative is that kids aren't quite ready to talk about things like race or ableism or things like that are really critical. It's their world too, they're along with us. So using art as an entry point for young kids especially, but really for everyone, adults as well, is kind of how we all came together to create this presentation and just the work that we're doing outside of that. Do either of you want to jump in with that as well?
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Yeah, I'm an artist. My background, although I would argue that everyone's an artist. So I think that's I can go off on that whole tangent here. But art has been such an important way for me to heal in my life from personal things that have happened and trauma and challenges. But then it's also been the way I've connected and interacted with others and, been in situations where we didn't speak the same language, but we spoke the language of art and have really come to believe that this is this universal human language that we hold. And have found how powerful it is, especially when there's complex topics, racism, all the isms, really, it's such a powerful way to have these conversations. I know as a white woman, I can see the ways myself and peers have a tendency to be like, okay, I'm going to intellectualize this. Like, I'm going to think through this and I'm going to stop being racist and I'm going to do all the right things and check all the boxes. And the deeper I get into this work, my kids are multiracial, as is my partner. So this is something that's coming up all the time in my house. And so I'm getting a mirror held up to my face constantly of like, wow, okay, look at how much of this colonialism and white supremacy is kind of baked into the ways that I default to things. I think we were joking earlier about like, you got to be there right on time. Otherwise, feel terrible about yourself. And I think we're really looking at collectively the ways that through the arts, through creativity, through this innate language that we all hold, we can really start thinking outside of the box. Kids, I've worked with all ages, and I do murals and activities and have a background in expressive arts therapy, which is where Amber and Steph and I originally met, but have really seen the ways that art taps into something different. And if we're trying to change the way, like what we've got right now is not working, there is so many systemic issues that are causing like this kind of, it feels very much to me that like, if I go by the default, I'm going to keep making the same mistakes of my parents and my grandparents and all the people who came before me who were not, to me, making the decisions, taking the actions to kind of shift things away from this, the way this country began some pretty terrible atrocities committed against, huge groups of people. So I can go on and on. I'm going to give some space to Amber, so that you get to share too.
I was like, keep going.
Come on.
So I have to wholeheartedly honor, I'm from Oakland, California, and I have to say that being raised in that city, automatically started my art journey. There's art all over Oakland, and it is already an activist city. Just given the nature that the Black Panther Party started there, where they literally created a whole new system for our entire nation for free lunch programs and things like that, so that children can eat and have sustenance. So I have to give honor to that, because that is the environment and that is the history that I was raised on. And in my own life, I have used spoken word as a natural way of healing. And I have participated in the Oratorical Fest, the Martin Luther King Oratorical Fest in Oakland. I've gotten all the way up to the whole citywide competition in the past. But for me, it was the experience of writing the first poem of feeling like I was wearing a mask, and I shared it with my best friend, who, without my permission, I never encourage anybody to do this, but without my permission, shared it with my English class, and everyone was touched by it. And that was the first time I ever noticed that something that I could create can have an effect and an impact on other people. And I would actually get an experience of creating a community of other people who have a shared experience. And that reverberated throughout my work in residential care, working with children in the foster system, and just being up, having hard time sleeping. I didn't have the words for it. I didn't know what trauma was at that time, but I knew, well, okay, spit your rap with me. Share your art with me, read your poem to me. And I was getting stories from all over the place, from, the most intense traumas. I'm not going to say all of them right now. I'm not trying to trigger anybody, but, from the most intense and severe traumas all the way through to joy and healing. And that was something that really sparked, like, okay, there has to be something out there that's art and therapy, and that's what I do now. But it's these moments that when Jen brought this project to me, I was like, yes, absolutely. Because if anybody knows me, they know that I am like all for collective healing, for, figuring out systems and how we can keep dollars circulating in BIPOC communities and things of that nature. And so this was just right up my alley of being able to support folks with understanding how racism impacts people of color, because oftentimes we're looking at the offender, but we're not looking at how people of color can also uphold systems of white supremacy, and how they're really internalized on such individual and personal levels. And so I think art can help us tap into that. And give us enough degree of separation that we can take an honest look at it and not be so triggered that we can't work through it. The art actually does both. We can work through it and calm ourselves and get enlightenment from it. And so I love this work, and I'm excited to bring this to a larger audience.
I'm excited that you all are bringing this to Step Up. It's like, I think in our society, we have looked at art as just something that is something to look at, something visceral, something that is like, hey, that looks great. But we never ever stop to ask about the emotional content that went into the art, the story that this is telling us, the story. And, it's like when I look at art, and I love going to museums. I also love music as well too. And I always listen to what's happening in between those spaces. What's happening with the person before they actually put something on a canvas, right? What emotion is coming out? It is so powerful. And so when I read your proposal and read about what you all were doing, I'm like, this is what we need. And Amber, you talked about this collective healing. It's all of our responsibility to co-create a world that we want to all be able to thrive and to have healing for the next generation, so that way they don't have to hurt anymore, right? It's like our country right now is hurting so much that hurt people hurt people. Let's try to move it in a way where we don't hurt individuals anymore, but to express it through art. How beautiful is that?
Yeah,
Right?
I love that you say that too, because I think for me, like, I did not grow up with art being something that I was comfortable with. And now looking back on it, like even as a kid, like I remember my kindergarten class, we had this it was called Creation Station. And that was just like when my name came up to have to go to Creation Station, like that was the one everyone wanted to go to. But I was just like horrified to have to go make something that didn't already exist yet, right? Like I remember that anxiety for myself, and that followed me like all the way into adulthood of I was really good at school. I learned how to do school really well. I learned how to fit in the box. I learned how to play the game. And I think it's funny now because I train teachers, right? But like I think there's so much harm that was caused by suppressing that creativity, wherever that suppression came from, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of places that it could have come from, but I think traditional schooling was actually one of them, where there just wasn't space to be me, right? There wasn't space to show up in any way except the way that I was supposed to, quote unquote. And so as an adult, I just found so much healing in like getting back in touch with that creativity. And like just even thinking about what is good and what isn't as far as art goes, right? What even is art and what isn't? And like all of these boxes that I was either taught or just believed through growing up in a culture that really devalues the arts and the creative process. And so, yeah, with kids, I was just like, this is the answer. We have to do this more with kids so that they don't also grow up in those boxes the same way that I feel like I did. And many people that I've talked to also feel that way. So I think that's the power of this, is like, it's not just to be able to have a critical conversation. It's like to be able to be your full self is art, right? So that's the biggest thing for me.
Yes.
I love what you're saying too, because it really brings in this element of play and imagination that as an adult we don't get to have, but it's really in that imaginal space. I do a lot of guided meditations. So it's really in that imaginal space that we get to let go of like those boxes, Susan, that you're talking about, and like all of these shoulds and categories that we have to fit into. And we really get to explore and go outside of the box, outside of those boundaries, color outside of the lines, right? Like, I really, and how do we allow that for our children as they continue to grow up and not stifle them? And like, I think we all kind of talk about like this balance, even as parents, like, but you're not doing it the way it's supposed to. And like, how do we let that go? Like, I find myself fighting with that every day. Like, how do I prepare you for what the world is right now while also allowing you to be an activist? And be okay with challenging authority, right?
Right.
And
the power of play, improvisation. That's that's great. Jen, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There's so much I want to add. That's why I warned you. I'm like, just cut me off. Well, I think one of the things that's been so powerful, as both Susan and Amber have referenced, is also taking a look at the way that art has been colonized, of like, because I grew up and luckily I had two parents who loved art and had a lot of art in the house. So there was just a lot of value in that in my family. But in the art classroom, there was like very specific instructions that you were supposed to stick to and very specific ways that you were supposed to do your art. And if you weren't someone who drew in a way that was aiming towards photorealist, like perfection, like perfect representation, then you were doing it wrong or you weren't good. I think that's the thing. And as I've grown up and, facilitated so many different spaces with so many different folks around art, I can guarantee in any group of adults, I would say there's maybe one or two who say I love art or I do art, but the rest of the folks in the room consistently say, I'm not good at art, or they laugh, they make some funny joke about how, like, don't give me the paintbrush, I'm going to ruin it. There's so many ways that we get socialized not to feel like we have art inside of us. And I think that's so key in this conversation, as Susan and Amber were referencing, is like, one is like just feeling, I have a voice to share. And then I think in this conversation of looking at anti-racism and looking at inclusion and looking at belonging and all of these pieces, regardless of where you are, you have to kind of understand who you are to be able to engage in conversations that don't turn into like defensive, like, like, not me. Maybe the people in the past did that, but I'm in the clear, so I'm not even part of this conversation. Or, all the layers of things, we have to first kind of understand how to connect with ourselves. And then there's a piece of art that I think gets missed a lot too, where it's like, you do your project, it's a very individualized process.
Yeah.
And like Amber was saying, the collectiveness, like what happens when you problem solve an art project together? I've done a lot of murals, and I think it's so powerful to see like, how do, like, one person really wants it to be called this or have this image, and the other person's like, no. Like, how do we collectively include everyone's voices? How do we make those decisions? I think art making is so much about choice making, what colors, and it goes way beyond, as you were saying too, like this final product that should go in a museum, and like, don't even ask questions about it because that's a famous artist. So like, if you don't like it, that's on you. Like, we've named this famous. So I think it's been, I think the connection between kind of decolonizing education and decolonizing like the way we live from day to day pairs so well in looking at how do we decolonize like art and our sense of selves, and those things fit. We've had so many conversations. We're like, this is, these fit so well together in conversation, and really believe that the arts are such a helpful tool so that we're not like staring at something, like being like, we've got to fix this, or trying to talk it out or intellectualize it. And it really, as both of you have mentioned, allows us to kind of find, I think of it as sometimes like the back door, where it's like, oh, we're just sitting here painting. And then we're going to talk, and that's a lot of the work we do of talking about like, how do we bring the meaning making to the conversation while creating.
Right. And encouraging the children to, even adults, right? It's like, sometimes I feel that we need to be encouraged to play. We need to be encouraged to imagine. It's like we've stopped imagining. And when we stop imagining, we no longer can see what we could possibly do.
Yes.
So yes.
True.
So what motivated you to present at the Step Up conference?
Yes, getting this out there in the world. I mean, we're so excited to be able to share our excitement around this work, to share what we're doing, to learn from others. I think it's so important to be in conversation. I think when people question it and ask, share other pieces, this is, as we say, it's co-created. We really value the opportunity to kind of learn and grow and build this out in the public.
I would say too, what I love about Step Up is that it's not one field being represented. It's not like everybody coming is a mental health counselor or a teacher or whatever. Like, this is literally anyone coming, doing racial justice work in their sphere of control and influence. And working with kids is just one of those. But I think that's a big part of our work too, is really honing in on like how many ways there are to show up in anti-racist work, and how many spaces there are to show up in that might not be like a designated DEI space, for instance, right? Like just living day to day, kind of like you said, Jen. So I think that's what I loved about this conference, is like, this is just one little tiny piece of such a giant movement that needs to be happening in all spaces.
Yep, absolutely. Amber?
I think it was for me really debunking what art is. And Jen kind of talked about that a little bit earlier, but in our presentation, we're really going to cover like all the ways that art shows up and how that is both cultural, how that is both a human experience, right? Like how all these things are really tied together and help us, one, connect and reflect and evaluate, right? We were really excited to put this out and also like get feedback here from.
Oh,
Oh, that was it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thanks, Amber. So my final question for you all is, what is the single most important message you want to convey to your audience to help move racial equity forward?
I think my immediate answer is that if we want things to shift, if we want things to be different, if we want things to change, our means of getting there has to change. Like if we want, to be and live into this world that we can imagine into being, where people feel like there's opportunities and they're thriving and connecting, then creativity is our way to get there. We have to rely on this tool that we all have. And it's going to make the journey, one, possible, and two, hopefully joyful. And that's really the way that we're going to unlock the possibilities.
Thank you, Jen.
I would say that one important message that I would like to get across is that there's a micro and a macro level. And if you're starting at just the most personal level, that's a start, and that small steps will lead to the bigger picture. And I think oftentimes people think that they have to have like this giant organization, or they have to like go to all the meetings and they have to do all these things, when really it's the discussion in your family. It's talking about it at the dinner table, right? Like it's changing that shift in your own mind. I have to even catch myself like, why do I have that thought about these young men right now walking across the street? What is playing into that? And if you're at least being conscious of it, right, that's making a change and a shift in how you're going to respond and approach every single situation. So I would say, don't debunk the small steps that you take, because it's the small steps that make the bigger picture.
Absolutely. Thanks, Amber.
Ooh, all those things. And I think there's so many most important messages, but I think the one that I will say now is trust kids. Like, I think kids are so overlooked as far as their capability and capacity to engage with complex things, nuanced things. And I think that really feeds into cultural narratives being continued that are really, really harmful, right? When we aren't trusting that our kids can handle the debunking, like Amber talked about, can handle it or want to handle it. Kids want to be involved. They are key players in this work, and trust them to be with us in it, right? So I think trust kids would be my biggest thing.
Kids are great teachers because they don't have the filters yet, right? So they will tell truth. If you want to know truth, go talk to a child.
Yes.
You have to be ready to hear that truth
Yeah.
as well, too.
Totally.
You have to be ready to hear that truth. And, it's like, so I have two sons. They're grown, and my oldest son has our grandson who's 14. And then my youngest son has my two grandchildren, my grandson who's 2, and then my granddaughter who's 8 months. But my 14-year-old grandson, when he was probably around maybe 8 years old, maybe 9, and Moana first came out, he was, he would say, Jima is that my people? And I was like, being, Pacific Islander Polynesian, I'm like, yeah, that's your people. Well, my husband is white, and he was flipping through the channels and he came across Vikings and he said, these are my people. And so Lyric is like, oh, wait. So Jima, if Moana's your people, is Vikings my people as well too? I'm like, no, I'm just kidding. But yeah, but it's like this whole racialized identity had me saying things that was very harmful because I didn't deal with my own traumas and I didn't work through healing, whatever I was going through. So I would say some things, and he came back to me one day and he said, Jima, if Papa's people are Vikings, that makes them my people. And I'm like, yes. And he goes, and Moana is your people, so that makes them my people, right? And I'm like, yes. He goes, Jima, what part of me do you not love? And I asked him why you're saying that. And he goes, because I hear you saying things about people that look like Papa that's not very nice. And at that point, I knew that my work in DEI had to change. It had to shift because I couldn't ask my grandson to separate himself from who he is. And through the decolonization process, it's like I found that, well, I'm Hawaiian, Chinese, Filipino, Spanish, and Portuguese. So I have 2 of the greatest colonizers running through my veins, the Portuguese and the Spanish. But this is the way I appear. So I could hide behind that. And that's when I started to think about phenotype and how we judge one another, that we don't know the stories of each other and our ancestors. And the things that we bring to the table were so much greater than this racialized identity. And so I'm so happy that the 3 of you are going to be bringing this to the Step Up Conference on April 28th. I think your session is from 2 to 4 p.m. And what a great way to begin the healing process, through this artwork, and how to encourage the adults that's going to be attending this to help their children process all of this. So that way we can imagine a different world, right? It's like we talk about, critical thinking, linear thinking. Let's talk creative thinking. Let's go there.
I
So,
love that. And the therapist in me is just saying, thank you for sharing that story. Like, that was a big part of what we do is storytelling. I absolutely am honored to have heard part of your story and your grandson's story. That is amazing. And that is what is the one of the key ingredients for raising anti-racist kids.
yes. Yes. So yes, I want to thank you so much for joining me this afternoon to share, what is why art is a key ingredient for raising anti-racist kids. And so we look forward to having you at the Step Up Conference on April 28th. So thank you, Jen, Susan, and Amber.
Thank you so much for having us. It was a great combo.
Absolutely. Yes.
Such an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.